Okay, so we can get into it. Um, so I'm gonna just do this presentation and then I have like an agenda slide and then after I finish the presentation, we can go over some actual code. I'll walk you through some code and then at the end we can do like a section for troubleshooting and answering questions and stuff. Um, So just get started here. This week, we're talking about props, state, and handlers in React. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about props, how to pass data between components, UseState, which is a special way of creating variables in React, callbacks, which are a way of updating state from different components, uh, lifting state, which is a solution to a feature of props or uh, a quirk of props where they can only be passed one way. So props can only be passed from parent components to children components, and that presents some problems. So lifting state is a way of solving that. Um, then we're going to do a recap. I'll just kind of make sure that we're all clear on these concepts, and then I'll have a section for questions, and then we'll do some coding. I'll kind of go over a similar thing to what the assignment is. It'll be my own slightly different version, just so you can't copy my code one-to-one. But you should get all the same concepts. And then we'll have a section for discussion, and that's when I will be able to help people with individual questions, and you can screen share and we can troubleshoot and stuff. So to start, we're going to talk about props. So props is short for properties, and they're a way of passing data between different components. And so you can think of them like arguments to a function. So here we have a regular to-do component, and here we have a to-do component that has a prop being passed in. The prop, it looks like an HTML attribute. So when you have an HTML element and like if it's an anchor tag or something, and you have your like href, same type of syntax as a prop. It looks like an attribute. So you have the name of the attribute, which in this case is title, equals, and then the value of it. In this case, it's eat pie. So to do is receiving a property with the string eat pie. And it's similar to like an argument in a function, but it's the React component way of doing that. A component can be passed many props at the same time, and they can be many different types. They can be numbers, strings, objects, etc. So here we're passing in a prop called eat pie, and that's a string. We're passing an ID, which is a number of 1, completed, which is a Boolean of false. When props are variables, so in these previous examples, we've been passing in primitive values, so a string, a number, whatever. Now we want to pass in a variable. You have to wrap it in curly braces. So here we have a variable called SumTitle, which could be a string, an object, whatever. And when we're passing in a variable, we use curly braces like that. So those were how to pass props into a component. This is how a component that receives props will use them, receive them and use them. So far your components have been functions that don't receive any parameters, and props will come in as a parameter. And so you can just put props as a parameter, and then you can use any of the props that were passed in. The parameter props is going to be an object that has all the different props as values. So you can use the dot notation to access the different props or the different specific ones that were passed in. So here we're receiving our props as an object that has all the different props, and then we're accessing the title prop using dot notation. Another common way, common syntax for accessing props is through destructuring. So I talked a little bit about destructuring, and we're seeing it again here. Destructuring is a way of creating variables out of properties in an object. So we have our props object, but instead of actually just getting the whole object itself, we're drilling into that object and getting just the title property. I actually clicked. So this is creating a new variable that is a property of that whole props object. And this is just a cleaner syntax. You'll see both ways though. You'll see this way and these animations. You'll see this way too. Okay, moving on to UseState. So UseState is how to create and change variables in React. So it's a function that's provided by React. It allows you to create and update special variables. And these variables are special because when you mutate them, mutate also means change or update, React will automatically re-render parts of the DOM where they're used. So it's a variable that you use in your components that is special because React knows to re-render those components when you change the variable. And if you remember, a core feature of React is managing re-rendering the DOM for you. So when you change a variable, React will automatically re-render the DOM. We don't have to do that. And UseState is essential for that to work. We have to use UseState. So normally, this is how we create variables. You can create a variable, let count equals 0, and then you can update the variable count equals 5. Pretty simple, pretty basic. We've all seen this. And in React, they just made it a little bit more complicated, but that's kind of the contract that we have with React. If we want to have it manage our DOM updating for us, we have to create variables and update them in this special syntax. And so we can still create variables in the old way. They just won't trigger re-renders in the DOM. So using this syntax, we can. And so the syntax looks like this is how you create a variable. Using UseState, you say const count and set count, which are being destructured out of this UseState function. So UseState is going to return an array where the first element is the variable we want, and the second element is a function that updates that variable. And then this last part is the initial value of that variable. And then we use this update function, set count, to update the variable. So we can't update the variable by saying count equals 5. We can, it just won't actually cause re-renders. It won't change things like we want it to. So whenever you're using UseState, you have to use this special function that they give you to update your variable. And this slide just talks a little bit about more in depth about what I just said, or I guess it's just a visual of what I already just went over. So this is your variable. This is your function for updating that variable. This is React's function, which does fancy things behind the scenes for re-rendering the DOM. So it's called UseState, and it's a function, and then you pass in the initial value of the variable. So here we want count to start at 0, so we're passing in a 0. Another feature of UseState is that you can only create variables inside components with UseState. So you can't use UseState just on like the base root level of your file. You need to be inside a component if you're going to use UseState. Okay, so those were some simple examples. This one, there's a little bit more stuff going on. So this is a component called download, and we're imagining it's in charge of doing display stuff for a download that you have going on your computer. So we want to store the percent completed, and then we're using UseState, so we need this setter is what it's called. So set percent completed. And so when we update percent completed, we want it to change the display somehow. And so this component download has another component, or it's returning another component called progress. And we could imagine progress takes in as a prop the percent completed, and then it does like some display. It could do maybe a progress bar. And then in here, we have a while loop. This is just kind of a simplified version of what might actually happen, but we could say while percent completed is less than 100, we download some stuff, and then we change percent completed to itself plus 1. And so this is how we're updating the percent completed variable. Yeah, did I have a question, Grant?
Yes. So one of the things that tripped me up in your return, the progress we understand is supposed to be like an outside, function that is being called somewhere else. Um, so the percent completed and the percent completed, the first one, right? That's just like my issue was that's just like a random thing you gave it, right? Because it's like the whole thing about props. It's just like a random variable name, and then the first percent completed next to progress is getting the data of the percent completed from the use state or setting it, right?
Yeah, so just to like make sure I understand your question, you're saying percent completed right here where it shows up in
Mm-hmm.
this return. So progress is taking a prop. I have percent completed here twice. So the first one is the name of the prop that we're going to access in progress. The second one is the value of that.
Okay,
And so
so
it's kind of like if we were to have a function where our function can have a parameter, and then when you're calling the function, you have an argument that you're passing in, and the argument might have a different name from the parameter. So here, our name of the parameter is percent completed. That's what this value would become in our progress component. And we could name this whatever we want. Basically, it just means in progress, we could change the name of this right here. And then in progress, it would get this value, but it would be renamed to whatever we have here. Here, I want to keep the
okay.
name the same.
So
Percent
it's
completed
essentially
is
like
becoming percent completed.
so like you said, it's more like a function than it is just a I thought of it like more of a variable and whatever you're naming it, that's what it's being ascribed to, which would be the percent completed. I just wanted to make sure because I saw it twice and I was just a little bit thrown off by it.
Yeah, so percent completed itself is a variable, and then
Right.
set percent completed will be a function. So variable, function. UseState returns a variable and a function. And the function is the thing that we use to change the variable. Because we can't just change the variable like normal. Because of React. That's just how we have to do it. Okay, I have another question from Nihal.
Yeah. My question is, if I'm not mistaken, the default value cannot be a nil, right?
Cannot be like null.
No, yeah.
It can.
It can? Okay.
Yep.
So how could we show that? So just the use state.
Yeah, you could say use state, and then where we have 0 right here, you could pass in null.
Okay, that's it. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that is a question I was going to ask. Because so do you have to determine when you use UseState, do you have to automatically when like because originally I just had it blank, but do you have to like determine what it is at that point? Because like this one is all numbers. So like if I wanted to use string, I have to put a string, I have to put like a blank string in there. If I wanted to use an array, I have to put a blank array in there. Or is it
I've always used it by passing in like I'll think of what the data type is. So percent completed is eventually going to represent a number. And so I would like to pass in kind of I could pass in nothing or null or undefined, but I would like to pass in kind of that version in that data type. So yeah, like an empty string, if percent completed was going to be a string eventually, or 0. In TypeScript, you can tell a variable, you have to be this specific type. In JavaScript, you can't. Like this could go from being a number to a variable or to a string to an object. It could be any type of data. And by initializing it with the kind of like 0 value or nothing value in that specific data type, it's just communicating, it's a little bit more clear what this should end up being. It should be a number.
so just best practices, whatever data type you're using, there should
Yeah.
be a blank version of it within the use state.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like we could imagine if I did pass a null in right there, then I say on the first time this runs, set percent completed equals percent completed plus 1. Percent completed would be null on the first time around. And well, null plus 1. JavaScript is quirky. I don't know whether JavaScript would do like a type conversion. It might. It might say percent completed plus 1 equals 1. I'd have to test that out. Because sometimes it'll say you can add things that are different types. But it's possible that that could error out. It's good to, yeah, have, if it's going to be a number, then pass in 0, if that's what you want your initial state to be. Yeah, it's not required, but it's best practices for sure. Okay, how's everyone feeling on this? Should I move on? We'll get to more examples as I start coding this stuff, and y'all can ask more questions. Okay, so here I just want to illustrate what this would look like. And I know it's a little bit small. I tried to fit a lot onto the slide, but this is what it would look like if you didn't use UseState. So we're creating a normal variable, percent completed, setting it to 0. In here, we're saying, while percent completed is less than 100, we add 1 to it, and then we pass it in as a prop to progress. Here, it's the same thing that was on the last slide. So the one on the left, it will work. You won't get an error or anything. Like React is fine with this, but it won't re-render this progress component whenever percent completed changes. So the progress component will be loaded onto your DOM. it'll have a value of 0 because percent completed starts as 0. And then every time you update it, React won't know to re-render this component because this is a normal variable. And React needs some sort of like binding to this variable. It needs to hook onto it and keep track of it. And it can't do it if we use a regular variable. So we can change percent completed all we want, and it won't re-render this progress component. If we do it in the UseState way, every time we set percent completed to a different value, it'll re-render this progress component. So this will still work. It won't give us the automatic updates to the DOM that we want. It won't change our display. This will. So this is the better way to do it. You can still use normal variables and in React, and you'll start to see like different uses for them, like different times you want to use them. But in general, get used to using UseState because that's what will trigger your DOM to update when variables change. So if you want the variable to be like displayed to your screen, or if you want it to be like, you could have a variable that's like a Boolean, and you could have something that either displays or doesn't display based on that value. And that would be another case where you want to have it be stored in state using UseState. Any variable that is in like it's directly involved with the DOM render, you want to use UseState for it. Okay, callbacks. This section I didn't have time to fully finish, but we'll get to there's some examples in the next section too. So callbacks, we've talked about them a little bit. They're functions that are passed into another function. So in this example, we have a function we define down here, this bottom one, and it's call me. So this is the call me function. It wants to be called. And then we have this function above called caller, which takes a callback function as a parameter, and then it calls that function. So we could call caller, and caller will call me. So this function, caller, is in charge of calling this other function. And we can change what function we pass into this top function, and it will always call whatever function we pass in. So it's a really kind of strange pattern to get used to because we're used to passing variables in as parameters, but you don't have to just pass a variable, like a variable that's like just a set value. You could pass in a function. So here we're passing in a function to another function. And that is a function. What really is the callback? The callback is the function that's passed in to the other function. So call me on its own is not necessarily a callback. It becomes a callback once we call caller and pass in call me. So why are callbacks useful? Well, there's lots of use cases and you'll start to see them more often. Don't worry about writing your own callbacks or knowing when to write your own. Like you'll eventually get an intuition, but for now you have to know how to use them because you'll see them in React, you'll see them in other things. We've already been using them. So map uses a callback. This arrow function that we pass into the map, that is a callback function. And we could define this arrow function here wherever we want. Like we could define it on its own line. It doesn't have to be an arrow function. It could be any type of function. But the key thing here is we're passing in a function to the map. Map is in charge of looping over our array and calling this function for us. So they're useful because another function manages when our function is called and what parameters are passed in. So if we don't want to write a for loop, map can have a for loop, and then in that for loop, map is calling our function for us and passing in each element of our array. So this is an example of a callback that we've been using. Another one would be an event listener. So if you have like back before React, if you remember having in just your JavaScript, you have a DOM element and you can say add event listener, listen for a click event, and then run some function. The function that you pass in on an event listener is a callback. We're saying, wait until this event happens and then call our function. So it's a good way of deferring calling a function until another function decides to call it for us. And I didn't, oh, yeah, same slide. So I didn't finish showing you how to use that in React, but we'll get to that specifically right here in this section. So lifting state. Lifting state is basically a solution to this problem where props can only be passed from a parent component to their child components, not the other way around. So you can't pass a prop from a child component to a parent component. And lifting state is a solution to that. So to make a variable in a child component available to a parent component, you must lift the state. This means defining those variables in the parent component, then passing them as props to the child component. And here I have this little visual. We could imagine the UFO is the parent component, the cow is the state, and maybe the earth is the child component or something. So we're pulling that state up. We're pulling it backwards into the parent components in the DOM. And so I have a little example here to demonstrate that. So here we could imagine we have a car component. And as part of that car component, we have a speedometer component and a gas pedal component. So this is what our car component looks like. It is called car, and it returns, well, it's a simplified version of a car. It only has a speedometer and a gas pedal, but that's fine for this example. So what kind of variable do you think we're going to need? I'm going to try to do some engagement here with the audience. I want to see, can anyone predict what type of variable we're going to want to use with this speedometer and gas pedal?
So I guess for the speedometer, you want speed, and the gas pedal, I guess you could use speed also, but maybe force.
Yep. You got it. It's speed. So we're going to be talking about managing speed within this car. And I'm going to show you how we're going to start with the gas pedal having the speed. And then we're going to realize if we want that speed to be available in the speedometer, we need to put it into the car component. So I'll show you how that works here. So here we have our speedometer. We could imagine our speedometer takes some props, and one of them is speed. That's really the only one we need. So speedometer we need to pass the speed in as a prop to the speedometer. The speedometer isn't in charge of controlling the speed, it's just in charge of displaying the speed. So we need to pass the speed in. The gas pedal is in charge of creating and updating the speed. So here we have our gas pedal component. We have a speed. So we're using UseState to create a speed variable. And then this is the setter for the speed variable, set speed. So when we want to update speed, we call this. we're returning, this component just returns some JSX. It returns a button. It's a very simple gas pedal. It's just a button. And when you click it, it increases the speed. And here we have our increase speed function. So on click, it'll call this increase speed function. This increase speed function sets the speed to speed +1. So every time we click on this button, it should increase the speed by 1. Okay, so here's our problem. We have this car. The speedometer needs speed passed in as a prop, but gas pedal has the speed. How do we get the speed out from gas pedal and into the speedometer? Because gas pedal doesn't have the speedometer inside of it. Gas pedal doesn't even know about the speedometer. So the problem is the speed variable is stuck inside the gas pedal, and we can't pass a prop backwards. So I can't say from gas pedal, pass that variable into car. Car is the parent component of gas pedal. And so the variables we create in gas pedal cannot be accessed in car. So how do we get access to the speed component in car so that we can pass it into the speedometer? Lifting state. So here our UFO has become the car. The car is lifting the speed variable out from the gas pedal component. So the car will now manage the speed, and it will pass it to the children components that need it. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is our updated car component, where we create the speed variable inside the car component. And then our speedometer now has access to this speed variable. Our gas pedal, well, before it didn't need any props, but now if we want to change the speed in the gas pedal, we have to have access to this set speed function. Because remember, in gas pedal, we were making this speed variable inside the gas pedal. Now we're making it inside the car. And so we have to, if we want to change the speed in gas pedal, we need access to this set speed function. So gas pedal now gets an extra prop on press, like you press the gas pedal. And whenever you press the gas pedal, well, we need to change the speed. We need to have set speed available. And looking back at this, I probably should just call this set speed. I could call this prop set speed right here, because on press, we're not just setting the speed, we have a specific implementation for that. But I think you'll get the idea here. So speedometer stays the same. We now are properly accessing the speed variable, or we're passing it into the speedometer. And then in the gas pedal, we now have props, and the props, well, we have an on press, which is equal to the set speed function. And so on press is now in our gas pedal, on press is a reference to the set speed function. And so now whenever we increase speed, we're calling this on press function and setting the speed +1. And now that I'm looking at this again, I would need access to the speed variable too. So that was an oversight on my part. We'd probably want to pass the speed in as a prop. There is a way to access the speed without passing it in if you just have the setter. So the setter function will have access to the current state, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But really what I would want is props to have the setter and the actual variable itself. And this is an example of a callback function. So we're passing in a function to the gas pedal. So this set speed function, we're passing it in to the gas pedal, and then the gas pedal decides when to call it. So that is a callback because we're passing this function in, and then the gas pedal component is in charge of calling that function. Oh, that's the end. This is just the default slides. Okay, how's everyone feeling?
Okay, but I'm still kind of stuck in my coding assignment, and now I'm wondering if it might be because I needed to move the list from one component to the main component or the app component.
Yeah. How about I'll do a little detour here. How about we just if you want, we could try skipping over some of the other stuff, and if you want, we could just go right into trying to solve that here, because that might actually be the most useful for everyone, because we'll get to see
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were done because you mentioned that was the end. So
oh, well, I was gonna kind of do like my own coding demonstration, and I could still do that. I was gonna like show all these things in action.
I don't want to interrupt that. You go ahead, and then I'll
Okay.
ask my question at the end.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I had this temporary file that I was, and everyone can still see my screen, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see it.
I had a temporary file where I was doing like screenshots for the presentation. So I'm just going to delete that. Okay. So this is the app that everyone has been working on so far. It's a to-do list, except in my case, it's a goose list, because I wanted to change just a little thing up. Instead of to-dos, it's geese, because I don't want you to just be able to copy my code. So anywhere where you see goose, think to-do. Anywhere where you see type, so the geese have a property called type, think title. Your to-dos have titles. Here, my geese have types. And last time it was frogs, but I just changed every occurrence of frog to goose, and so now I have poison dart goose. I didn't look up geese types, but we could imagine. Okay, so we have these geese, this list of geese, and we have our main app component, and I can full screen or make this a little bigger for now. So in our main app component, we have our heading, which is geese, or in your case, to-dos. We have an add goose form. Oh, wait, I think this is the version that I already did the updates to. So I'm going to use git, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to go backwards to before I did this demo work. So I'm going to do a git branch, and I'm going to list out the different branches. I'm going to want to go to, well, actually, I think there's a previous commit that I want to go to. So I'm going to say git log one line. Okay, so here's where I changed frogs to geese. This is a commit hash, and I want to check out this commit right here. So you can check out branches. You can also check out commits. Git checkout, and then I'm going to paste that commit hash. Oh. And I'm going to go back in time to this previous state. Maybe reload the window because I was getting some rudeness there. Okay, so this is the state that the app should be. We have our goose form and our goose list and our goose list item. And so I'll just start going through the assignment here. Pull it up right here. And I'll just start walking through. And if anyone has any questions along the way, feel free to stop me. But okay, so we're going to start with move the list item into new to-do list item component. So, oh, and now that I look at it, I might have already done that. So I'll try going back. So here we had an li. We're passing in passing in the geese and goose dot type. What's this error? Failed to resolve import goose list item. Oh. Oh, because I deleted that. Okay. Okay, so this is where it should be. And now we're going to make a new component for each of these list items. So each to-do item should be its own component. And so I'm going to go here. I'm going to make a new component called goose list item.jsx. And it's going to be a component, which is a function called goose list item. How's my zoom level? I might want to zoom in a little further.
I can see pretty well.
Okay. Okay, so we have our goose list item. We're going to return, well, an li. And let's just say hello goose. This is our hello world for geese. And then I'm going to go back to my goose list. So this is the list of geese. And right here, we're making a bunch of list items, but we're actually going to want to now use our new component, our goose list item. And so to do that, we have to export this so it can be used in other files. Export default. And then I'm going to import this goose list item component into my goose list. So I'm going to say import goose list item from / goose list item.jsx. And then I'm going to replace this list item right here with this component. And like that. And again, I like to use self-closing tags, but you could also write this like that, where I have an opening and a closing tag. For this, it does the same thing as just having the actual closing thing right there. So similar thing. And we can see they're rendering now inside our list. Hello goose, hello goose, hello goose. So we have our geese. Now we need to bring our key back, which tells React, it's just an internal React thing. It tells React how to differentiate between the different items. So this is something that you need when you're doing a list of components. You add a key with a unique value. to each one. And that's how React kind of behind the scenes resolves which component changed when one changes. So we're doing that. And now how do we get these goose items to stop saying hello goose and actually having the types of these different geese in here?
I'm guessing you have to pass those types as a prop.
Yep, exactly. So we're going to say type equals goose dot type, like that. So now goose list item has the key, which is that internal React thing, and then a type prop. This is our custom prop that we're passing in with the goose type. And now in our goose list item, we can access that type by getting the props. And then in here, instead of saying hello goose, I could say props.type. And now you can see it updated with our actual geese type. So first step down, using props. We're using a prop now to pass data into a component. Okay, what's next? I think that was all that. Yeah. Okay. Handle, add, to do, form, submit. So now when we add a goose, we want to get the value of this input and store it in a state variable, and then display it to the screen eventually. So in our add goose form, remember this form doesn't do anything yet. Hello, add goose, doesn't do anything. So now we need to actually add some functionality to this form. And so I might have to have a couple of refreshers on this one. So we're adding a name attribute to the text input with a value of title. Okay, so the input, we're going to say name equals, well, goose title. How about we're doing goose type? So I'm going to change those to type. Name equals, and I could just do type. You're going to do title on yours. I'm doing type because I am storing the type of goose, not the title of the to-do. Okay, so now I want to create a function which handles the form submit. So when you submit the form, a function that runs called handle add goose. So I'm going to create a new function, handle add goose. This function will be called whenever I submit the form. And I could just put in here where I call it. I'm going to say on submit on the form. And we're going to pass in this handle add goose function. So now, and that's another example of a callback. This function will be called when the form gets submitted. So now whenever I submit that form, it should call this function. And I can actually test it out by saying console.log form submitted. Oh, actually, it'll show up in the console really quick, and then I'll probably reload the page. So if I submit the form, yep, So it shows up for just a brief second and then the page reloads. And if you know how form submits work, they actually reload the page by default. And so we actually want to prevent that. And so this function will get, it'll get a prop or a parameter passed in, which is the event, just like an add event listener function. Our callbacks will get an event. You'll sometimes see it called E or event. You can call it whatever you want, but I'll call it event. We're going to say event dot prevent default. And so the event, which is the submit event, will no longer reload the page. I hope, if I did this right. And then we should see our form submitted showing up. Yep. I can make that a little bigger. Form submitted. So we're pressing this button, submitting the form, and it's calling this calling this function and logging out form submitted. So now I want to, let's see, I want to get the value that's in the input at that state. And so I'm gonna, instead of using the parent document, like I could say document.getElementById to get the input, or query selector, document.query selector, and I could get the input and store it in a variable. Const input equals document.querySelector input. What did I do wrong? Input document. Oh. Okay. Had to take a minute to refresh. Okay, so this should be able to get the input, but we're actually going to do it a slightly different way. The event itself will have the form element as part of it. So I'm going to get the form element, and then using the form element, I'm going to get the input element out of the form element. I'll show you how to do that. It's using this event. So I'm going to say event.target. The target of the event will be the form element. And so I'm going to store that in a variable. I'm going to say const form equals event.target. And I could console log that out just to verify. I console log form, and I'm just going to comment out this input thing. So this console log form should show us the value of event target, which I'm expecting to be the form element. So if I submit, yep, you can see here in my console, I have the form showing up. So I'm storing that in a variable, which we're actually going to need. And then the input, well, the input, if you look, is right here. It's inside the form. And so we can actually do a query selector on the form itself. We could do form.querySelector input, like that. And that should get the input. So I'm going to move this console log down, and instead of console logging the form, I'm going to console log the input now, just to make sure we're getting that. You can clear your console, by the way, by clicking this, clear console. Because sometimes like Vite will have specific things that show up that clutter up your console. Okay, so I submitted the form, and now we're getting the input element, which is what we want. With that input element, we can get the value of it. So I could say const input value equals input dot value. And now if I console log the input value, this should actually be the value we type in. So if I say random gibberish, we're getting that right there. Okay, so when we submit the form, preventing the page from reloading. We're getting the form element from the event target. We're getting the input using a query selector on the form element. You can use a query selector on any element. So far, you might have mostly seen it used on the document itself, which is the root element. We can use query selector on any DOM element. And so we're getting the input. And just by the way, there's a different way in React that you can access components without using any DOM selectors that you'll get to. They're called refs. I don't expect that that's how they want you to do this yet, because they haven't shown you how to use refs yet. But just so you know, there's another way in React, because I've mentioned multiple times that in React you don't have to worry about the DOM at all, really, and you don't even have to do query selectors or anything. There's a different way to do that, but for now we're doing it this way. So we're getting the input value, and now once we have that input value, well, we want to store it in state. And I think that, well, how about I'll do a git commit. I probably should have done a couple by now, but it's fine. Clear git add all, git commit -m, and I'm going to say add new goose list item component, and yeah, and handle, how about handler function for submitting add goose form. Good description. When you're doing Git stuff, you can do whatever you want as the comment, but it's helpful to get in the habit of trying to be as descriptive as you can about the work that you did. So that's what we did. Okay. So now I think we're at the last step. So enter the value into the text input and submit the form, verify that the value entered is in the console and the form is cleared properly. Oh, I forgot to clear the console, or the form. So right here, we're supposed to clear the form. And the way we do that is form, that form element, dot reset. You can reset all the inputs in a form by calling reset on the form element itself. So now when we submit a new goose, it'll clear the input. Okay, last step, store a new to-do in React state. So we want to go to our app.jsx component, create a new state variable called new to-do, or new goose in our case, and update it using set new goose. So I'm going to go to my app.jsx component. I'm going to create some new state for the new goose. So whenever we enter into the input, we want to store that goose in state, in a state that we get from UseState. So I'm going to say new goose and set new goose equals UseState. And what do I want the default value of a goose to be? Well, I think I'm just going to store the type of goose, because in this input, all we're doing is typing in a string. And a goose itself, if you remember, like if we look at not the goose form, but the goose list. I have gooses. I should probably put geese, right? So geese are actually, in this case, an object with a type and an ID. But just to kind of simplify, I think for our case, we can have the new goose just be defined as a string that's the type of goose. And in your case, it would be the title of the to-do. And then at some point, it'll get an ID and become an object potentially. But for now, we're just going to make the new goose an empty string, and then we're going to want to set it inside our add goose form, right? Well, actually, let's start by displaying it. So, actually, let's start by resolving this error. So I have an error in the console. It's saying UseState is not defined. Why is UseState not defined? Well, we need to import it. That's an easy thing to forget, and potentially could solve problems. Import UseState from React. And then it's not the default export. It's actually part of a whole bunch of exports. And so we have to access it using destructuring like that. So this is the syntax right here. And I have this little 4.2 kilobytes gzip. This is, you won't see that. That's an extension at the end right there, that green part at the very end. You'll just see where you'll want to put this. So wherever you use UseState, you need to import it from React. And that should resolve that error. It didn't. What am I doing wrong? Gooses is not defined. Oh. Geese. Geese. There we go. Okay. Everything is working. So make sure you import UseState when you're going to use it. Import it from React. And now we have this new goose variable. It's starting out as an empty string. And I'm just going to try putting it into the DOM like this, new goose. And I think they wanted us to put it in like a P component maybe, or a P tag. So paragraph tag with the new goose. And it's an empty string at first. If I change this right here, this is the default value that it starts off as. If I change it to like new goose, now it'll display new goose. But because it's starting out as an empty string, it's not going to display anything. It's an empty P tag. But set new goose will allow me to change it. And once I change it, it should show up. Where do I want to change it? Well, in the add goose form. And this is another example of our state. They asked us in the instructions to already start with the state pulled back into our app component. If this state was inside our like goose list, then we'd want to lift the state. We'd want to pull it outside so that all the other components can have this state accessible through props. So our add goose form is going to want this set new goose function. And so I can pass it in like that. Set new goose equals set new goose. I think that's the way they want you to do it. Pass set new to do as a callback handler prop named on add to do. Okay, so they actually do want you to change the name of it. So on add to do. So instead of set new goose right here, I'm going to say on add goose, set new goose. What this is really doing is saying within our add goose form, this set new goose function is going to be referred to as on add goose. So on add goose will become the same thing as set new goose. It's just basically changing the name of it within this add goose form component. So now in our add goose form, we're going to receive that component or that function as a prop. So I can do props, and then wherever I want to change the goose, the new goose, I can change it using that variable in props. So I'm going to say Well, instead of console logging the goose or the input value, I'm going to say props dot on add goose, which is that function that sets the new goose. And I'm going to pass in the input value. And that should be the last step. I'll try it out and see if it works. New goose. And then I'll try adding it. And yep, it adds it right there. We haven't added it to the main array of geese, just because that's the assignment hasn't asked for that. We're just displaying it right here, but that should be good. That's the assignment. So I'll do a git commit or git add, git commit -m, store new goose in state and set goose state within add goose form. And I could do a git push. Actually, I've been doing all this work on this random commit here. I might be running into git problems if I push. So I should have demonstrated creating a new branch on Git when you start. You should be creating a new branch when you start the work each time. I forgot, so I'm sorry. But okay, that's it. So how is everyone feeling?